Look, I get it. You just closed a major case. And things with your mother are complicated. And hey, you found the swordsman, and believe me, we are grateful and in no position to ask for a favor. But there's a killer taking us out one by one, so we need Cassandra Killjoy to get back to work. And so it would come to pass that in the far future, superheroes would no longer be autonomous vigilantes, but official agents of peace and justice. A legion of superheroes. Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. I'm Erod, and I'm the Blockbuster Buster. And in order to tell you this story properly, I have to take you back, all the way back, to the very beginning.
Secret Origins.
During the golden age of comics, 99.9% of all superheroes were 30-year-old white men. And unless your superpower was to turn into a 30-year-old white man, any super characters that were younger than that were sidekicks, with one huge exception: Superboy. Now, while Golden Age Superboy is classified as a legitimate superhero, his adventures are not quite as legitimate, as Superboy's stories were more lighthearted and silly, and intended to appeal to an even younger demographic than the one that comics usually targeted at the time. It was mostly seen as a gateway comic to bring in new readers, who would one day transition to the slightly more mature DC titles. So yeah, while Superman was fighting gangsters, Nazis, and the Klan, Superboy's adventures were absolute nonsense. For this reason, it is often debated as to whether or not Superboy's adventures should count as canon. On one hand, it is 100% clear that this is not a younger version of the Prime Superman. It is an alternate version that started his superhero career a lot earlier in his timeline. But on the other hand, a lot of pivotal comic book moments transpired on the pages of Superboy. Case in point, the Legion of Superheroes. Created in 1958 by Otto Binder and Al Plastino, like most elements from Superboy's comics, the Legion was not supposed to be taken seriously, with the joke being that yeah, one day there will be a team of superheroes entirely comprised of teenagers, but in the far, far futuristic weird sci-fi world of the 30th century. But the readers didn't see it that way, especially teenagers who loved the idea of a team entirely comprised of teenage heroes that never had to answer to any adults. So, due to their unexpected popularity, the Legion continued to appear in the pages of Superboy, but as a novelty act. This all changed in 1962, when Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created Spider-Man, a legitimate teenage superhero whose adventures were packed with real-life problems, devastating tragedy, and plenty of nuance. And thus, the Legion of Superheroes started to evolve. Originally headlined by Superboy, but then, 2 decades later, they would finally headline their own comic and have more dramatic and grounded stories. Now, as far as the animated series is concerned, the DC animated team had been trying to get a Legion cartoon off the ground since 1998. After the success of Superman the Animated Series on the Kids WB, the network immediately wanted a spin-off. And while the DC animated team always intended for Justice League to be their next show, multiple options were pitched, including The Legion. The episode New Kids in Town was produced not as a backdoor pilot, but more of a proof of concept. However, as it turns out, by spin-off, what the Kids WB actually meant was make another Batman show. And by make another Batman show, what they actually meant was make a young Batman show. But that is another story. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, when the DC animated team had moved their shows and talent from the Kids WB to Cartoon Network, where they produced 2 monster hits, Justice League and Teen Titans. So when Warner Brothers Animation alum James Tucker pitched a Legion of Superheroes cartoon, Cartoon Network jumped at the opportunity. Originally, like the original comic, the show was going to be titled Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. But at the time, the estate of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were tied up in a legal battle with DC Comics over proper compensation for the use of all the other characters that Siegel and Schuster had created for the publisher, which include but are not limited to Superboy. So while that was being sorted out, the creators of the series opted to drop the Boy of Steel from the title and simply refer to the character in the show as Superman, which in my opinion is much cooler. And thus, the Legion of Superheroes officially went into production just in time for Cartoon Network to change their minds. In a case of terrible timing, a new head of programming was taking over the network and wanted to take the fully animated channel in a new direction, one that didn't include the Legion. The good news was that the producers of the show were given permission to shop the show around to other networks, and lo and behold, the Kids WB jumped at the opportunity. Yes, the same network who just 1 decade earlier rolled their eyes at the prospect of a Legion cartoon were suddenly hot and heavy for a show about a young Clark Kent learning to be Superman. Gee, I wonder why. Now, via extreme coincidence, just 1 week before Legion of Superheroes premiered, the Justice League Unlimited episode Far From Home aired, which not only features the Legion of Superheroes, but everything about it plays like a backdoor pilot. The cast and crew of Legion of Superheroes had to spend the following week telling any media outlet that would listen that Legion of Superheroes was not a spin-off of Justice League Unlimited and was in no way a part of the DC animated universe. Unfortunately, this is a fact that is debated to this very day, as Legion of Superheroes reuses lots and lots of character designs from Justice League, and Brainiac is voiced by Corey Burton, who also voiced the character on Superman the Animated Series, as well as many other DC animated shows. Plus, it is not hard to fit the show in the DC animated universe timeline, because with the Legion's technology, it is very plausible that they can just pluck Superman from any point in his timeline, then erase his memory and put him right back without anyone being the wiser. So whether or not this takes place in the DC animated universe, it's truly up to the viewer.
The plot.
In the 30th century, a group of superpowered teens who are inspired by the exploits of the legendary Superman decide to put together their own team, a legion of superheroes, duly deputized agents of the law that specialize in super crimes and world threats, identified by their Legion flight rings, which work both as official badges and gift each wearer with the ability to fly. Currently, Earth has joined the United Planets, and the Legion is spread thin across all the worlds that are under the Federation's banner. So at times of great peril, the Legion travel back in time to call upon the help of the very hero who inspired them, Superman.
Is that?
It's me, honest.
Wow.
Cast and characters.
Very much like the comic, this show also has a rotating cast. So for that reason, there were only 2 characters who were there from the beginning all the way to the end. Brainiac 5, played by Adam Wiley, the team strategist and engineer. Brainy is the great descendant of the original Brainiac, arch nemesis of Superman. To me, Brainy is the greatest concept to come out of the Legion comic book. The idea that even somebody like Brainiac would have a white sheep in his family. Brainy's lifelong quest is to make up for the sins of his ancestor. So not only does he dedicate his life to being a hero, but he's also a massive Superman fan, generally serving as the sole decision maker when it comes to when to borrow Superman from the timeline and how much information about his future he's allowed to know. Personally, I thought that this gave Brainy way too much power over Superman, and I was hoping that one day we would see an episode where the Man of Steel would confront him about it. But unfortunately, that never happened.
I won't let you hurt him.
Does he know you have this? What other secrets are you hiding?
Clark Kent, aka Superman, played by Yori Lowenthal. In a future ruled by bureaucracy and politics, having Superman around is a breath of fresh air, as Clark has no interest in diplomacy or public relations. His only concern is to do the right thing, which often means going against the grain and breaking the rules.
Thought about what you said back there, so I ran a full-dimensional scan and found something cloaked on the ship. Always used to drive me crazy when the guy in charge wouldn't listen.
Season 1.
Legion of Superheroes premiered on the Kids WB on September 23rd, 2006, with the pilot episode Man of Tomorrow. Now, in the comics, the leader of the Legion is Cosmic Boy, played by Will Wheaton. But as I said before, in the show the Legion is spread thin across all the worlds that are part of the United Planets. So Cosmic Boy works more as a CO that oversees all the different Legion teams. The series predominantly follows the team that is stationed on Earth, on New Metropolis, which is led by Lightning Lad, played by Andy Milder. His team is comprised of Saturn Girl, played by Kari Walgren, Bouncing Boy, played by Michael Cornacchia, and of course, Brainy. Other members like Phantom Girl, Triplicate Girl, and Timberwolf come and go. Already overwhelmed by their day-to-day duties, our heroes are put to the test when their city finds itself under siege by the 5 most dangerous criminals in the galaxy, the Fatal Five. It is their sudden illicit activities in New Metropolis that leads the Legion to make the pivotal decision to retrieve Superman from the past and bring him to the 30th century in order to help defeat the Fatal Five. However, the Superman that they get is from much too early in his timeline, one who is yet to master his powers and hasn't even become a superhero yet. Which is my first of 3 big gripes with this season, which are as follows. Number 1. If their intention was to get the greatest superhero of all time to help fight the most powerful villains of all time, then why did they get a young, inexperienced Clark Kent? Now, the excuse that the show often uses is that records on Superman and his life are incomplete, so it's hard to gauge where to find him in the timeline. My counter argument to this is that with Brainy's 12th level intellect, he could easily extrapolate where and when to find a more experienced adult Superman, which he does later in the show. And you better believe we'll be discussing that later in this video. Number 2. The pilot does a ridiculously good job of overhyping the Fatal Five. But unfortunately, they really don't amount to much throughout the series. One would assume they were going to be the big bad for season 1. But they're not. The Legion defeats them 5 episodes into the season, in an episode called Champions, where the 5 try to assassinate the president, who's also Phantom Girl's mom, at the Intergalactic Games. And most of the Legion is actually absent in this episode. And while Superman does his part, the actual reason that the odds are tipped in the Legion's favor is because a bunch of random athletes from the Galactic Games jump in and help them out. Now, don't get me wrong, the episode is good. It's just that the Fatal Five's arc is terribly anticlimactic. And number 3. As soon as Clark arrives in the future, he immediately starts running into analogs of all the members of his rogues gallery, like Lex Luthor, General Zod, and Mr. Mixius Pitlick. And then they don't really do much. Mixie's analog, 6, pops up in one more episode in which he learns his lesson and redeems himself, which is not terrible, but it just feels like a massive waste. But in spite of all that, the rest of the season is good. Season 1 concludes with the epic 2-parter Sundown, where a renegade controller unleashes a sentient super weapon called the Sun Eater, which has the power to destroy an entire solar system, and is currently headed towards Earth. And this happens right after the Legion holds an impromptu election and selects a new leader, Bouncing Boy. And the plus-size powerhouse devises a very unorthodox strategy to take on the very unorthodox threat. Because if they are going to take on the most powerful weapon in the universe, they are going to need the most powerful beings in the universe on their side, the Fatal Five. So our heroes must bust the 5 out of jail and perfectly execute a complex multi-part plan, otherwise the entire universe as we know it will be destroyed. Like I said, epic.
I have assignments for all of you. Work fast. We don't have much time.
Now, had the show just been season 1, it would have been fine. A solid B+. But the following year, everything got kicked up to a whole new level.
Season 2.
If Season 1 was more of an adaptation of the more light-hearted adventures that the Legion had in the 50s and 60s, Season 2 is more of an adaptation of the 80s, when things got way more badass. The season kicks off very much like the last, with the Legion taking on the latest big threat, which is the Dominators. Chameleon Boy, played by Alexander Polinsky, is added to the team, who is an excellent addition.
The guy's a straight up beast. Hello. Eyes on me, please, because I'm kind of a beast myself.
Bouncing Boy is inexplicably not the leader anymore, and Lightning Lad has once again taken command. But this time around, instead of them going back in time to recruit Superman to help them fight the Dominators, plot twist, a future Superman travels back in time to get the Legion's help. This is Kel, a clone of Superman from a post-apocalyptic future in which the universe has been conquered by an evil Darkseid-like cyborg called Imperiex, played by the great Phil Morris. So the Legion goes to the 44th century with Kel, devises, and then executes a plan. But they fail, and goes sideways. Big time. Imperiex travels back in time to the 30th century and starts conquering the era. One of Triplicate Girl's duplicates is wiped from existence, Saturn Girl gets knocked into a coma, and Lightning Lad loses an arm. Suffice it to say, the Legion needs the help of a professional superhero right the hell now. So Brainy just pops back in time and gets Superman. Not Superboy, not an inexperienced teenage Clark Kent, Superman. See, I told you he could do that! It is important to note that both Superman and his clone, Kel, are played by Yuri Lowenthal, and he did a magnificent job. So it pains me to share the following unfortunate fact. Voice actors can voice up to 3 characters for a production for the same pay. It is not until they voice a 4th character or more that they get a pay bump. So, Yuri Lowenthal delivered 2 of the best performances this season, sometimes opposite to one another, and he was not compensated adequately. And that pisses me off beyond measure. While in this season, Clark is a well-adjusted man in his mid to late 20s with a clear view of his path and purpose, Kel is the brooding emo teenage version of Clark. Like if Superman and Batman had had a baby. Hell, there's even a scene where Clark subtly compares him to the Dark Knight.
But you remind me more of a friend of mine. Strong-willed, bit of a loner.
So yeah, it goes without saying, but the rest of the season is excellent. Taking our heroes to their limit and exploring who they are and what they're capable of more than ever before via brilliant social commentary and divisive moral dilemmas. Everything comes to a head in the epic show finale, Dark Victory. Now, previously in the series, Imperiex intended to steal the Messenger, which is the device that Superman's dad, Jor-El, invented that creates crystalline structures, originally intended to save Krypton from falling apart towards the planet's end. But unfortunately, Jor-El never got to use it. Now, Imperiex plans to misuse it as a weapon of mass destruction. And the only one who currently knows where to find it or how to operate it is Brainiac. So Brainy had to access the restricted encrypted part of his brain in order to access Brainiac's memories and save the day. But in doing so, he awakened Brainiac's consciousness, which takes over his body, and the first thing that he does is kill Imperiex and start assimilating the entire universe. Hey, I did warn you that things were going to get really badass. He also kills Superman, but we all know that that wasn't going to be permanent, because if Superman were to die, then he wouldn't exist in the past to inspire the creation of the Legion, and that would create a paradox. So, in the end, it all comes down to the brilliant cyborg taking agency of his body to save everyone and destroying his evil ancestor once and for all. Or did he?
Evil does not die. It evolves.
Unfortunately, we will never know what this amazing cliffhanger was going to lead to, as Legion of Superheroes was abruptly cancelled on April 5th, 2008. Now, there are some ridiculous rumors out there that this was due to low ratings, as the show could not compete with Justice League Unlimited and Teen Titans, but that is simply not true. In spite of the fact that Legion of Superheroes was not as popular as the other DC animated shows that were on at the time, it did have a loyal audience and steady ratings throughout its entire run, both when episodes would premiere on the Kids WB on weekday afternoons, and when they would rerun on Saturday mornings on the CW. The Legion's actual woes were once again due to a change in leadership, as a new head of children's programming was appointed at the WB, and they decided to mark the beginning of their tenure with a change in branding, officially ending the Kids WB and replacing it with 4Kids TV, which would stray away from original programming and have a higher concentration on dubbed anime, based on the massive success of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, the latter of which became their flagship show. In fact, the cancellation of Legion of Superheroes was so abrupt that Season 3 had been entirely planned out, but cut short right before it went into production. So let's take a quick sidestep into Legends of Fandom territory.
The third season that never was.
According to James Tucker, the season would have taken place 3 years after the events of Season 2, where Brainy would have left the team after the incident with Brainiac, seeing the Legion recruiting new members, which would have included but not limited to Censor, Magnetic Kid, Supergirl, Tellus, Princess Projectra, and Shadowlass. All the while, other members of the Legion that were generally relegated to the background would have been pushed to the forefront, like Block, Wildfire, and Dawnstar. Additionally, Kel would still be there, but he would have been relegated to being the occasional guest star. The main story arc for the season would have seen Brainiac as the big bad, which would then force Brainy to return to the team in order to help his friends defeat his evil ancestor once and for all. As far as subplots were concerned, there was a plan to adapt the Ghost of Pharaoh Lad storyline from the comics, and in the process, introduce the fallen hero's long-lost twin brother. All of that sounds amazing. Unfortunately, it was just not meant to be.
Final verdict.
Legion of Superheroes is like a double feature that takes you through the different eras of comic book history. The first half takes you through the Golden Age and Silver Age, lighthearted, silly, sci-fi fun, while the second half takes you into the Bronze Age and Modern Age, dark, gritty, and thought-provoking. Two halves of a cantankerous comic book coin, all of which is populated by awesome, relatable, courageous characters, whom you will want to follow from beginning to end. 10 points in the badassitude meter! Put on your flight ring, don't forget to save your holo games, and give it a watch. Until next time, I'm Erod, and I'm the Blockbuster Buster, and long live the Legion.